So this week was the release of a very, very big game, Suicide Squad: Kill the Justice League. It's been in development for many, many years now. It's been surrounded by a vast amount of controversy because it is apparently set in the Arkham verse, but it doesn't really look like an Arkham game, doesn't feel like an Arkham game, and it's moving away from the single player narrative more towards the sort of games as a service thing, which typically here at DF we're not massive fans of, to say the least. But John, you decided to seize the nettle to play the game, to actually find out what it's all about. And I'm very curious. I mean, obviously, you've got content on the way, but I'm curious to see what you think about it.
Yeah, so this was an interesting one because you're exactly right. The build up to release has been somewhat of a disaster, I would say. The initial showing wasn't good.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of the things that they chose to focus on in that early media, I think, sort of painted a very negative picture. But after playing it, I actually think it's all right. I
Okay.
think it's not. I wouldn't say I like it to the degree of the Arkham games by any stretch, but it is significantly more enjoyable to play through than I expected, and it looks better than I expected. And also, you can kind of, at least thus far, mostly ignore the games as a service stuff. So, which I have done. You
Okay.
don't. I saw some people complaining that, oh man, like this loot doesn't do much, so I don't, I'm not using it. And I thought that was actually positive because then I don't have to constantly go into the menu and change stuff around. I can just kind of like, yep, okay, there's some loot. I'm just gonna ignore that. I
Okay.
don't care about loot. But so first of all, let's talk about the visuals then. So this game fell sort of prey to one of the biggest problems in recent times, which is YouTube compression. The environment they've built is extremely complex. It's very dense, and it relies on a lot of texture detail and nuance in that. But when you strip that stuff away, which is what happens when poor bitrate sort of comes into the mix, it makes the game look, I would say, noticeably worse than it does in person. And I went back to that initial showing with the gameplay, and I think this combination of poor compression with just jumping around chaotically without players being able to understand what the core gameplay loop is just paints a very negative picture, and it just winds up looking like any of those normal games as a service mobile gamey kind of things, and it's
Okay.
not really quite like that.
Right.
In fact, after playing it for a while, especially when you play as King Shark, uh, it actually plays a lot like Crackdown.
Okay.
And once I started to treat it more like Crackdown, but with an actual with these characters and surprisingly fun story, I've been able to have some fun despite that, and that's not something I expected to say based on everything I'd seen prior, because there was a lot of messiness going on, and part of that comes from just also things like the HUD, the initial HUD, the way they showed it. I shut a lot of that stuff down. You can turn some of that stuff off. The damage numbers and some of the readouts and indicators you get, I recommend switching things off because the default setup is just a mess. It's just text and numbers everywhere and it looks terrible, I think. But when you turn it off, you can kind of ignore it and it feels a bit better. I'm feeling scattered because I'm still in the middle of my video on this, but I don't think this is a very middle of the road experience for me. And it's only like pleasantly surprising because I did have such low expectations, but I'm kind of enjoying the storytelling so far. I don't know how it's going to end up, but I like the cutscenes. I like the characters in it. I think they're really well voiced and acted. And this comes after playing Gotham Knights for the first time this week, which has some of the worst delivery I've ever seen in recent. Like it was just dreadfully boring, zero engagement. Here, though, when the characters are on the screen and dealing with other characters in this world, it's actually surprisingly compelling. I thought
Okay.
it's kind of tense, so it has me wanting to continue. I think this game would have been better if they had left all the service stuff out of it. I actually do think that's made the product worse than it should have been. And in fact, even on day one, I had issues where, so we got the 100 pound early access version first on the
Yes.
Xbox, right?
Hmm.
And you pay a lot of extra money for that early access for this game, And on the first day of testing in the afternoon, the servers just went down for a while. So I was
Yeah.
stuck and I couldn't do any more capture. So I was like, all right, I'll just sit here, twiddle my thumbs, and start writing or something, which I did. And it eventually came back up, but that's the kind of thing that just, it feels unacceptable to me when you're asking customers to pay that much extra money for something and then you're not getting that.
Yeah.
And just being connected to the servers all the time, there should have been an online mode from day one. You don't need to play online.
An offline mode. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah,
So,
and there was also stories that the game auto completed when you first started it,
yeah, that's
which is
a
which is
mess.
not great. And prior to that, of course, there was the preview period where the press were, let's just say, unkind, or rather, well, there's a kind of how can you describe it? A precedent that a preview isn't too judgmental about a game until you've actually gone hands on with final code. But IGN, and not just IGN, by the way, a lot of outlets basically just
Yeah.
came out straight and said, not really enjoying this, to be honest, which is not often seen. And it was quite astonishing to see that unfold. But it does seem that there has been a bit more positive reaction to it. I decided to have a go on it last night. I was on PC, and yeah, we've got problems there, haven't we, John? It's a. I mean, in the wake of Arkham Knight, you'd think that this wouldn't happen again, but there are some profound issues with the PC version of Suicide Squad, to the point where I can't even look at it at this point. And I'm not exaggerating with that. It's
Yeah,
it's
okay.
not great.
Let's be clear here. So I am also looking at the PC version. On the consoles, I think if you're playing on Xbox Series X or PS5, you're gonna have a good time in terms of like the performance, the experience. It looks good. Xbox Series S, you'll see in the video. It's something. PC though, PC, I would argue we have another Jedi Survivor / possibly Arkham Knight on our hands. Maybe not as bad as Arkham Knight at
They
launch.
won't withdraw it from sale.
No, I don't think it was like Arkham Knight had some serious issues, and I don't think that's this bad. The issues here on PC are more, they just really impact the general experience, even on a high-end PC.
Absolutely.
So first of all, this game has major frame time problems. You cannot get smooth motion. Even when your frame rate is high, everything about it just looks kind of choppy in motion and not right in a way that's not the case on the consoles.
Yeah.
I know you felt that, Rich, right? Just looking around with the mouse playing, it feels bad.
It is bad, and even with a joypad, right, where you
Yeah,
can
it's not
basically.
smooth.
I mean, yeah, the difference between mouse and joypad is with a joypad rather, you can actually change the camera angle in a kind of smooth sweeping way, but you don't get smooth sweeping motion. It looks awful. It's like similar to what we saw with EAWRC, where
Yeah.
the camera update is not seemingly in sync with the movement, which just looks
Correct.
bizarre. It's
Very juddery
unsightly.
looking.
The cutscenes just look really bad.
Well, actually, some of the cutscenes, they do have some camera motion issues on consoles as well, but because it's capped at 60, it feels a bit more like sort of an unsteady camera look to it.
Right.
But on PC, if you're running with a VRR screen and an uncapped frame rate, trying to get those higher frames, it really messes up the cutscenes, and they look terrible.
Yeah.
As a result. But the arguably more serious problem is that it's an open world Unreal Engine 4 game. So what do you think's going to be in here? It's stutter. There's so much stutter in this game. It is non-stop stuttering. It's bad. And this is also one that compiles shaders every time you boot the game, by the way.
Yeah, what's
as if
that all about? That's
I
bizarre.
don't know.
We've
seen that before.
Absolutely. Hogwarts does it. It's exclusive to Unreal Engine, and I don't quite understand why.
But I don't think, I think there is some shader comp stutter in this game, but it's more traversal stutter that's the problem. Just moving through the world, the game is constantly just like hitching, stuttering. How far did you play, Rich? Did you actually make it to the city?
I did make it to the city, yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Oh, so you got to see it's bad in the
It's
city.
not great, yeah.
No, it feels terrible. And if you look at the frame time graphs, you can see it. It's just all over the place. And we're all running on pretty high-end machines, I would say, right?
Well, you're not going to get much better than a 4090 with a 13900K. And, I was doing stuff like, going to DLSS performance mode.
Yes.
Which you shouldn't really do. And
No.
you can be running at 144 frames per second. It still doesn't look right. It's just
Yep.
bizarre.
And actually, the stutters get worse at those higher frame rates. They're
Yeah,
longer,
absolutely. I
right?
mean, the higher you are, the lower you fall. Really, that's the way it
Yep, yep,
works
yep.
with the stuttering.
On top of that, though, the PC version has ray traced reflections as an option, and it has to be some of the least optimized or at least heaviest ray traced reflections I've ever seen. And given what they look like, I'm not sure it justifies that performance hit. It's very CPU heavy. So I'm using a 12900K CPU, which is it's getting older now, but it should still be adequate for this, especially considering ray tracing performance in so many other games. The RT reflections, there are points where my frame rate would dip into the 30s, which is
Wow.
unacceptable in
Okay.
this. It's not smooth.
Yeah.
And so I can't play it with ray tracing on, and that is the one big visual feature that it has over the consoles.
Yeah. We got this question here from Eric Hurst. John, I have played a bit of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. And I think that there is a great game deep underneath the shell of a live service game that it presents itself as. In fact, it sort of reminds me of the feeling I got playing Arkham Knight on PC day one back in the day, an excellent game that was buried under a thick pile of mud that was the PC port. Yet it seems Arkham Knight has managed to climb out of the mud and become a fantastic game in most aspects on every platform. Do you think history will be as kind to Suicide Squad? Do you think that if Rocksteady puts in the work to undo some of the terrible games as a service tropes, as they've already claimed they will by doing things such as removing the always online story mode, that someday the game will rise to some form of glory? Or instead, now that it has started down the dark path, will it forever dominate its destiny? What do you make of that?
Oh, the first thing is I want to point out the line he says, "Do you think history will be as kind to Suicide Squad?" Which is funny in the context of a game as a service, given that its history will likely amount to being offline and no longer playable. But we'll see. Hopefully, it's not the
Well, they're
case.
saying here there's going to be an offline version of the story mode.
I guess the question is, how will this remain accessible long term? We'll see. Hopefully, but I don't know, man. I know some people were hard on Arkham Knight. I loved Arkham Knight from the beginning. I thought it was awesome. I preferred it to Arkham City,
The
honestly.
console versions were fine, right? There was
It was excellent,
some
yeah.
performance issues when in the Batmobile, but it was fundamentally
Barely,
sound.
I'd say. It was almost completely locked with perfect frame pacing and just stunning visuals for the time. It was arguably the best looking game that had been released at that time, I would say, or at least in the top
It was
five.
up there.
It was up there. It was something special. When you go back to it now and you're like, wow, this is stunning. Suicide Squad, I think fundamentally, I do think the core gameplay loop is reasonably fun, but the actual mission design lacks the flair and interesting design elements that you get in the Batman games, because a lot of it does, unfortunately, even though the core combat can be enjoyable, it does still often amount to going to parts on a map and shooting guys. And again, that's not necessarily bad, but uh there have been, however, some hints. There's been some sequences that feel somewhat, I guess, more interesting narratively and sort of set piece like to a degree. Like the first, I don't want to spoil too much, but like there's that point early on where you first encounter Batman, and that alone was, I thought, pretty cool to set up evil Batman there, you know. But beyond that, after you survive that little sequence, you're actually let out into this sort of museum piece that you're kind of exploring with like all of Batman's like accomplishments.
Yep.
And you see all the villains and the heroes sort of spelled out within, and hearing your characters comment on what they hear from the little speaker boxes you can go up to press. And it's a fun little moment that adds a lot. And those are the types of things that have sort of made the game more interesting to want to continue playing, I would say. Because the core loop, while fun enough, could very well become very tiresome by the end, which the Arkham games specifically were known for very creative, carefully crafted level designs. Yeah, in City and Night, you did have the open world environment, but it was not that large, and it was designed as sort of like a web, almost a hub like area that connected these much larger, carefully crafted levels together. And there's a lot less of that in this game, from what I can tell.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get any kind of sort of immensely appealing wow factor from starting the game. You know,
No, not a wow, certainly not a wow factor.
no. Yeah,
Uh, uh,
difficult one.
oh man, so we'll see. Uh, I think this game is going to go down as okay. I think
Okay.
it's not the disaster people expected it to be.
That is
It
kind of
is,
damning with faint praise, though.
yeah, I mean,
It
it's
is
not
what
a
it
bad
is.
game, and I've had some fun with it, and I didn't expect that necessarily, but it is. And I do think some aspects of the visuals will be very remembered as well. I think the cutscenes in particular, it's not gameplay, I get it, but in terms of just pure visual design, the actual cutscene quality is extremely good.
Yeah, character
The
design's
animation work,
first
the
class.
performances, it's striking. You actually want to see them continue to interact with one another in a way that was not the case in Gotham Knights, which woof, woof, those cutscenes, man. That's not very good.
Yeah, just for the benefit of those who aren't on the supporter program, John spent an hour with Gotham Knights this week and recorded it for posterity, and it's become the second entry in the John Versus series. That's
Exactly.
exclusive content just for supporters. Seems to be going down well.
Yeah, people have enjoyed it.
I did enjoy the fact that initially you were quite enthusiastic about it during the first investigation scene of the tutorial. And then you got out into the city, and on your ultra high end PC, you were dipping beneath 60 frames per second. And there was this kind of air of incredulity about the whole thing. It's like, what's
Yeah.
causing this? How is this happening?
You don't see it on the screen, right? You're looking at how the game looks and you're like, why is it run like this?
Yeah, didn't quite make sense.
It doesn't make
Doesn't
sense.
and didn't.
No.
Yeah.
It still does not.
I don't think we've got too much more to say about Suicide Squad without spoiling the content. But yeah, I think people are going to be talking about this for quite some time.